Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pharmaceutical Soccer here on whatever you're listening to our podcast on, whether that's Spotify or iTunes. We're so excited to have you. I'm excited, especially after watching that 2-0 Nashville win in Colorado. Let me tell you, I am ecstatic right now. I don't know. How are you guys doing this weekend?
Oh, because there was an own goal.
Yeah, he's doing a bit because there's an own goal.
Oh, ha 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 ha.
Y'all
I'm
suck.
laughing.
I was thinking about this bit the entire weekend. I was waiting for you guys to correct me, and then I was just gonna bring up like, wait, no, I read the score sheet. It said Shaq Moore and Teal Bunbury's. Wow, how are your weekends? I'm so
To
furious.
be fair, you would do something like that. I mean, you would be like, "Oh, Shaq Moore scored," and then like we would get on something, and you'll be like, "Wow, wait, Nashville
That's
didn't
why it
win."
was going to be funny.
Anyway, so the person who came up with that brilliant bit was Stephen Robinson. I'm Clay Trainham, also joined by Valer Shavilla. But
Hmm.
anyway, Valer, how was your weekend?
Thanks, guys. Appreciate the intro from one of you at least. I had a good weekend, I think. Um,
You
what
think?
did I do? Oh my God. You ever get asked something and then you forget everything right away? Oh, Saturday night. Yeah, had a couple friends over, ended up watching the NSC game. Got some really good guacamole that my girlfriend did. So that was nice. I don't know. I have nothing to talk about. Sunday, saw some family members, met a new family member who, well, they're not new, but I just met them for the first time. They're in like their 60s. So that was fun. Just like a distant cousin, not really distant, just second cousin, but they had left Iraq before I was born. And so never got to see them. And I got to meet them. So that was interesting. And then what else did I do? I think that was about it. Had some good food, man. It was good. What
What
did
about
you
you,
guys
Clay?
do?
I did stats for 7 softball games. And then after I got done with that, I watched wrestling in Sting's last match in as a professional wrestler. So that was pretty cool. I do want to give a shout out to the MTSU softball player who came out to Limp Bizkit's Break Stuff, as that was the first time I've heard the song Break Stuff in the wild in at least a decade. So a shout out to you, whatever your name was.
Yeah, they're playing
We
shows
noticed in
again.
the press box. I'll leave it at that.
They're playing shows again, which is hilarious from a Limp Bizkit standpoint. So,
Also, don't look up Fred Durst's political opinions. I'm just going to put that out there. It's
uh,
not worth
I didn't,
it.
I didn't even think about that. I also had a pretty decent weekend. Unfortunately, there's no National SC DC watch parties, so I watched the game at my house. Well, I kind of watched the game at my house. I don't even know if Nashville knew that a match was happening. So I did watch some of it, but I ended up going to the Postal Museum for my first DC museum trip, which was a lot of fun. I definitely had a good time at the Postal Museum for sure.
That's an interesting first museum choice, but I respect it. My grandfather helped start the American Postal Workers Union in Indiana. So shout out to the Postal Service. I'm
I
just
mean,
gonna
I
leave it.
I knew
I don't
that.
really know about the band, but shout out to them as well.
I mean, it's a good band as well. But look, okay, bits aside, because unfortunately they don't work on this show because I host a soccer show with a bunch of fun killers. We're coming into Nashville, 1-1 draw away against Colorado. Um, I mean, I don't know. We're still undefeated, I guess. I don't know kind of like the best way to look at it from an overall perspective. I think you could go either way, which I think is the tough thing about it when it comes to just Nashville from an overall perspective. Obviously, we'll get a little bit more into game detail coming up in the next segment, but just kind of like your first thoughts. Like, what were you thinking after that match specifically, Clay?
Like, my first thought is just where the vitriol came from after the game. Like, it wasn't a good performance, but I was just kind of confused as to what people were expecting without DPs playing, without like starters in the lineup. It wasn't a good performance, and I'm not excusing the performance. Nashville was very lucky to get out of there with a draw for the second straight week. It must be said, but like this is what happens with teams playing multiple competitions over the start of a season. Like there's only been 2 wins by teams that played in Champions League so far this year. So like this is kind of all of a wash to me. Like they got a result. I'll take that result. I'm not going to read too terribly much into it because that's just we see this happen every single year with teams in Champions League. So I can't be particularly too high or too low coming out of weekend MLS results, especially weekend MLS results missing two designated players.
I think for me, I was more curious about how I can't really get a good read on this Nashville team. I mean, I know people want to kind of be a little more pessimistic or even optimistic, saying, "Oh, against Mocha it was like this, or against the Rapids and New York it was bad." And I honestly just can't get a read out of this. We've gotten 4 games of Nashville SC, which generally those 4 games would span around what, a month, let's say 3 weeks on a regular MLS schedule. We've gotten 4 games in about 2 weeks, or just about 2 weeks. That's a very short period of time where all 3 of the DPs were out at a certain point. Walker Zimmerman is now back in the mix, but not really fully fit. He's still not fully there. Dan Lovett's not fully there. Um, there are some new Tyler Boyd, Drew Yearwood, both got into the team, and Tyler Boyd was injured for a game as well. So I think what I'm kind of curious about is to try to get a read into this Nashville team and try to understand, hey, has there been improvement from last season? Has there been whatever the opposite of improvement is? But I really just can't at this point. I cannot make a decision on Nashville SC or what this team looks like because of the circumstances. They played Mocha. First of all, the schedule is very congested. We've never experienced Nashville SC with this schedule before, right? That's the first part. The second part is that they played Mocha, who is a far inferior opposition. I can't really draw much conclusions from that. And then the other thing is that Hani Mukhtar has had 30 minutes this whole entire season, and Sam Sturridge has had 50 minutes this entire season. So I don't know. I can't tell you what Nashville is doing. I can't tell you how good or bad they are. What I can say is that I understand people's upset. People are upset because it looks more of the same from last season, and I get that. I get why people are frustrated with it. There wasn't a whole lot of change, and there wasn't a whole lot of creativity going forward. Again, they are missing their 2-star players. I mean, the 2 most expensive, most paid players on this team are not playing. So I get that. Also, the prolific goal scorer and assist uh, giver is also out. So I understand. I get both sides, and I'm not ready to make any sort of judgments on Nashville SC yet.
Yeah, I think some of it is the carryover from last season. I think a lot of the posts that we're talking about, like you hadn't had an MLS win since July or something like that, which is, definitely something to take into consideration. I I don't know. I kind of look at it kind of more from a back overall perspective. I think you come into this match like before the match starts, you tell me that Sam Surridge and Hani Mukhtar are not going to be in the match no matter what in a away match in Colorado of mind you, which is a difficult place to play no matter what, just based on elevation alone. I'm going to be excited that you're coming out of there with a draw no matter what. Absolutely 1000%. But I do think where some of the vitriol comes in is just kind of the back end. What is the plan without Hani Mukhtar? Because there has to be one at some point. There has to be some sort of creative presence that's other than Hani. There has to be some other way that you're able to score goals with Hani not being there. Because of the fact that you do have a lot of matches, you do have a congested schedule. Like there has to be some sort of plan, which Valeria, you're saying like it's just not seen. So you're not necessarily able to get a good judge of what this team actually is.
Like, I understand that question. I genuinely do. It just sucks because the answers to those questions are also hurt. Like the clear plan without Hani Mukhtar in years past, and now given he's been injured, and so maybe you need to replace him, has been Randall Leal playing in that role. And he's been effective in that role in the past. The clear answer for who's going to score goals is going to be Sam Surridge, but Sam Surridge is also injured. Like you have so much of your team that's not playing that it feels unfair to throw the big question that is the question of the entire offseason, the question of last season. Well, they tried to answer it, but those guys are hurt. And that has to be part of, like, in this league, you're only allowed to spend on three players essentially, and two of them are hurt and one's a defender. And so that's why it's kind of frustrating because it's like, yeah, they don't have an answer for what to do with Hani Mukhtar, but one of their main answers for what to do with Hani Mukhtar is also hurt. Like that's the problem that I wish people could kind of understand more. Like it's not just that he's out, it's that he's out and the other guy that's supposed to score goals is out and the other guy that's supposed to play a playmaker in that role is out. It's a lot of compounding injuries and it needs to be considered before getting really worked up about a game without all of them.
I will say this though, there is a counter argument to this. By the way, Steven, I don't know where you got that stat from. Nashville SC won in October against the New England Revolution, 3-2, I believe, like late October
The
last
stat that he's referencing is the one that's going around. Like they only have three league wins in the last whatever, however many months. Of
year.
course,
Okay,
Yeah.
but
several
there
broken
are
up
league
during the
wins.
playoffs in the
Not
offseason.
did
But
you say
leave that
three
alone.
or
Three
no
league
league
wins
wins?
since July. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're right. You're right then. Okay, sorry. I thought you said there were no league wins. I was
I
like,
said the stat wrong. It was my
okay,
fault, but three league
yes.
wins since July.
That is a correct stat. There have only been three league, just to counter Clay real quick on this, because I think the frustration is kind of, I think there's grounds for a lot of this frustration because to me, when fans are talking about, well, how limited Teal Bunbury is. Let's not beat around the bush here, and you sign a striker, you sign another striker, you sign a homegrown striker, but neither of them can be involved. Well, the homegrown striker, I guess, can be involved, but you don't want him because he's too young. I understand that. You sign a Jago, but you don't prepare for him to play in MLS, which we'll get to him later. And you keep Teal Bunbury. Teal Bunbury is limited in his striker role. We know that because he only scored 4 goals last season. Is that good enough for a backup striker who was a starter for most of the year? I don't know. I'm just saying, I think there were some steps that Nashville SC could have taken, like buy out Randall Leal because clearly Randall Leal isn't working out. If they wanted to be more serious, if they wanted to compete for championships, I think these are steps that they could have taken during the offseason to maybe improve the squad. Now, again, all of it is a risk. I don't know. You can go get $1 million signing instead of Randall Leal, and they could not work out, or they could be injured again, of course. But I think what people are arguing is that they're not taking enough risks. At the same time, I know they signed Tyler Boyd. I understand that that's a player who can make something happen. But I think what people are frustrated about is that there's more that the front office could have done to prepare for Hani and Sam being out.
I do agree that there is more that could have done. It just seems so out of some of the way that people have been talking about this team just seems so out of place with what the facts on the ground are right now. Because people weren't this loud 2 weeks ago. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the story was the same. Like they got a point. They didn't play particularly well, and they got a point without two of their best players. This is the same scenario, but the anger from which it came is different than last week. And it doesn't fully make sense to me, even though I agree that they could have done more and they should have done more. We talked about that at great length in the offseason about what they should do and options they have. But it just seems a little bit overboard this early in the season.
Yeah, and yeah, agreed. And Valaire's poll kind of actually had Valaire's Monday poll that he decided to put up did have, kind of the thought process from the fans specifically. So Valaire, do you want to go into that?
Yeah, so I put out a poll. It's our weekly segment that is extremely creative and that I came up with, and no one else has ever done in the history of sports shows ever. And it's called Monday Poll, where I ask people a question from the Pharma Soccer Twitter account, our Pharma Soccer, and they get to vote, and we get to talk about it. I'm happy to report, there has been 122 votes already in these couple hours that I've put out this poll. So people are very passionate about this. And the question was, as things stand with injuries, with everything, how optimistic are you about Thursday night and the match against Miami? The results are a little more pessimistic than I thought. So only 4.9% of people said they are optimistic. 13% of people said they were somewhat optimistic. And the rest, which is about 80% or so, said they were either somewhat pessimistic or completely pessimistic. So yeah, about 85% of people are either somewhat pessimistic or fully pessimistic about this upcoming Thursday night match. I can't really blame them. Honestly, I can't really blame them. It's not looking good for Nashville, but I will say this before I turn it over, because I know somebody else would have some thoughts about this. Every time, and I will say this about every single time, almost every single time, Nashville SC are the underdogs who cannot perform, who are put in this terrible situation. They somehow thrive as underdogs. They somehow find a way. And I'm not saying they will on Thursday. I'm just saying we've seen this scenario before. Every time Nashville SC are the underdogs, they play much better than if they are favored. And that's just the history of this club if you look at it from the beginning to now.
I mean, I'm like, so I voted on it and I put somewhat pessimistic. I'm like, and it's not necessarily, I don't think Nashville's necessarily looking bad. I think Nashville has been one of the teams that has been able to show that we can stop Messi and company because we've done it. We've done it a couple times. It's the, I don't know who, I don't know if Hani's playing. I don't know if Sam is playing. I don't know who's going to score goals. I don't know what's going to happen in the match specifically because I don't know what to expect from this team. And I'm not going to know what to expect from the home crowd, as we'll talk about more in the third segment as well.
Yeah, I put somewhat optimistic, but only because one, I'm naturally a little more optimistic than most,
What? You are?
the but also for the exact same thing that Valer said. Like, I think that betting, just generally speaking, betting against Nashville at home in these sort of scenarios is a tough bet. That being said, they did lose a home playoff game last year, but generally speaking, Nashville puts in a better performance when the odds are against them, when no one gives them a chance. They tend to put things together, and the healthiest part of Nashville is the most important part of Nashville in this case, being the defense. So I put somewhat optimistic, but I'm being a little bit blind on that. They've got a tough road ahead, but all they have to do is be in it. If they're in it after one match, it's all there to play for.
You know who doesn't have a tough road ahead when it comes to getting their NSC content? That would be our new Patreon member, who I believe we have a shout out for. Is that correct, Blair?
Yes, we have a new Patreon member. So shout out to Bobby for joining in the Patreon. And also shout out to Bobby for sending us a really sweet message about how much he likes the show. So thank you, Bobby. You can be like Bobby by joining our Patreon. It's only $5 a month, but it goes a very long way in supporting this show. And financial support is very important to us, and we really cherish it. And thank you to Bobby and every single Patreon member who has been with us from day one or who just joined last week, like Bobby. We appreciate you all. If you become a Patreon member, you'll get a shout out on the show, of course. But also, you'll know that you're supporting this soccer show like no other soccer show in this town. And we're just great like that, but we're only great because of our Patreon members and the people who have been listening. So thanks to y'all.
Yeah, I will say, like, Bobby, that like we all saw the message. We were all we felt it was amazing to be able to hear. Like sometimes you don't necessarily understand, what a podcast could do for somebody and help somebody, and like it really meant a lot to us on the show. So we appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining the Patreon and leaving us that beautiful note. We really appreciate it. We're going to talk more specifically about the Colorado match coming up here in the second segment, and then we'll kind of talk about the Mocha match too. Keep forgetting that we had another match during the week as well.
That will be way more fun.
That would be a lot more fun to talk about. And then, of course, we'll talk about what is upcoming. God, that scares me. I don't want to get to that third segment, but we'll talk about that next right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer. And we are back right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer at Pharma Soccer on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And as Valer talked about in the first segment, you can also join our Patreon. That would be at Pharma Soccer there. Please, we would really appreciate it. Help support the show. Again, you'll get a shout out on the show. We're going to do a lot more when it comes to the Patreon this year as we keep going forward. So thank you so much for everybody that is a Patreon member already. And sign up. We would love to have you and talk to you in a different place and time. So Nashville, Colorado, of course, being the first match that we're going to talk about, as that is the one that is fresh in our memories. 1-1 draw for Nashville SC in that. Goal from Shaq Moore, not for Nashville, but for Colorado, an own goal. That can only be, I don't know, one of the very entertaining own goal. I'm just going to say I did think it was an extremely entertaining own goal from Shaq Moore. And then Teal Bunbury, our all-star striker, getting the penalty call up and shot and converted it for Nashville to get that 1-1 draw. Ran out of there with a point in Colorado. We kind of talked about it just kind of in the middle as we were kind of jumping into this segment that this is going to be interesting kind of to talk about just because of the fact there's not a ton of new ground when it comes from last week to this week. Of course, Sam Surridge and Hani Mukhtar both not in the lineups. Nashville was it the same lineup against Red Bulls that they ran against Colorado? Or was there changes in the backfield?
I'm very much muted. They went to a back five in against which they ended the game against the Red Bulls with a back five, and then they went into a back five to start the game at Colorado, and then changed it again to a back four to end the game at Colorado. So a little bit of change, and Walker Zimmerman came in and started the game, and so that was a little bit different than what we saw against the Red Bull. But in terms of on the pitch, fairly similar, I'll say.
Yeah,
Just yeah.
It was tough. It was absolutely a tough watch. I think at halftime everybody's kind of reaction was kind of the same of just being just a yeesh. Like we just spent 45 minutes watching that. Like it gets tough. Like especially because it gets to the point where it's the expectation, especially at the start of the year, where it's just like, wait, I'm expecting to just not be interested in my team for the first 45 minutes. I
Yeah,
was hoping. Go ahead, Blair.
it's the classic Nashville SC away from home situation. I think we're seeing it again, except at the altitude, which doesn't really help a whole lot. I'm not using this as an excuse. Again, don't. As some people on Twitter were not happy that I was reporting what people are saying, and I was like, "Look, this is what Nashville SC is doing." And they were like, "Wow, you don't bash the club every second of your breath, and how do you dare you not do that?" Look, I'm just telling you what's happening. Nashville SC are very happy to have a point from that game. That's what Gary Smith said. That's what Tyler Boyd said because they didn't play very well. Teal Bunbury was isolated by himself, just trying to make something happen. They tried to pass the ball around. Colorado were pretty terrible. Let's be honest. Nashville SC were also terrible. That was one of the worst games I've ever watched, and I would like to never watch it again. That's my recap of the
Well,
game.
if you guys just want to know how to be miserable, uh, imagine spending most of your weekends this time of year, waking up and watching Everton in the morning and then watching Nashville SC at night. So all these people that talk about how hard it is to watch Nashville, just realize that that's the second time I watched that game that day. So just know that that is something that Evertonians get to experience is that game twice a weekend, every
My,
weekend.
I mean, mine's definitely
Um,
different watching Chelsea. It's still just as bad, but
it is not just as bad. Just shut up. It is not just as bad.
It is
Don't
not.
try
It is
that
not.
nonsense on me. Just because you lose to Everton at least once a season doesn't mean it's just as bad. Now, anyway, moving on from that, I will say the only like sort of silver lining that I'm taking out of this performance wise is that Jack Mayer uh, is really starting to get back to where he looked this time last year. If you'll remember, around the All-Star break last year, pretty big names like Tom Bogert were shouting Jack Mayer as a potential best 11 defender. And after he came back towards the end of last year, he didn't really look the part. He had lost his role actually to Lucas McNaughton for certain games. And I think he had just a fantastic performance once again. Obviously, he has the big play that he makes to keep the game 1-0 in the second half, but just the type of leadership. I mean, clearly it's the Blair Shabilla bump, it's the on-air bump, and, and I think maybe some other Nashville players can see, the way that bump helped them, and perhaps they can go on his show and maybe have a similar sort of uptick in performance.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. I mean, look, he does one interview and then all of a sudden he's back into the mix, back into the mix for Defender of the Year or whatever. But no, I do think I think because and I said this last year as well on this show and a few others. The Nashville SC's attacking woes kind of take away from their how good they are defensively. Because at one point, it's just not enough to be that good defensively. Yes, they are great defensively, but if you can't complement it on the other side, it kind of goes away. It means nothing because you're not really winning matches at any point.
I mean,
But
in football
most of
terms, if anybody watches Iowa football in the Big Ten, that's literally what Nashville is, which is scores 7 points a game, not even sometimes. But I mean, that doesn't win you. That doesn't win you much.
There's a reason Kirk Ferentz has had a job for 20 some odd years.
I don't know what any of those words mean, but I'll keep going on my point. Natural,
Just know that that wasn't a particularly kind comparison for Gary Smith.
but like Jack Mayer has been a great defender, and you think of Lucas McNaughton, who they got for very cheap from Toronto, who was barely playing any minutes for Toronto, comes in, becomes a great, amazing defender, and those two can cover for defender of the year Walker Zimmerman when he's hurt. Even when you look at somebody like Josh Bauer, who comes in and always puts in a great performance. We talked last year about Josh Bauer taking a step towards becoming that third or fourth center back, and now he sees himself as fighting for that spot in the fourth center back with Kellman. So regardless, Nashville SC's defense is such a strong unit. And even when you look at the fullbacks, yeah, I know Dan Lovitz is coming back from injury. I know Shaq Moore scored an own goal. I understand that. But those are very solid fullbacks when it comes to MLS teams. So that defensive unit is not a worry for Nashville SC and continues to not be a worry. And I just don't want it to be taken for granted because of why the attack hasn't been able to kind of produce anything, because that defensive unit is not common in MLS to have that good of a defense.
And then I know we're about to move on from here and talk about a game that had a lot of scoring, but I don't want to get lost in the fact that after a not particularly fun week for Teal Bunbury, especially in Nashville online circles, how impressive it is that he steps up in the 90th minute, which by the way, 29th goal scored in the 90th minute or later in Nashville SC's history, which is a pretty crazy stat on its own. But he puts in a calm, collected penalty. It's only the second time I think he's taken a penalty for Nashville, I believe. And a huge moment, and that gets him a goal, which is important. Also, this is a weird other stat. He a center forward scored for Nashville 2 games into the season. It took 10 games for that to happen last year in league play. So just a
Not
fun
good,
sort of
man.
sad stat that is. So center
Yeah.
forward scores in the second game for Nashville. That doesn't always happen.
Yeah, that's a tough one. But I did ask Gary Smith about the decision for Teal Bunbury to take that penalty because, I mean, the top three penalty takers for this team are all injured. They weren't even on the squad, let alone on the pitch. So I asked him, and he said that him and the assistants were kind of talking about giving the penalty to Teal because they thought he was the best penalty taker on the pitch. And by the time they came to that conclusion, they went and told Dan Lovitz to inform the team, and Teal Bunbury had already made that decision on the pitch as well. So both the coaching staff and the team on the pitch were in agreement that Teal Bunbury will take the penalty, even though that wasn't something they had discussed before. So I don't know, just because I asked that question, I wanted to share the story.
I mean, I
I
do.
was curious if it'd be Mayer after we talked about Jack Mayer penalties.
Like, I do think there's a few things that are like a little bit more interesting from the Colorado match that I kind of want to bring up. I just kind of the way this team operates. Sometimes I don't necessarily understand it, and I think it shows how good of a unit they can be, and then how bad of a unit they can be specifically as a team. I don't. I think probably every player on the starting 11 had at least one missed pass in the first half. Like I was trying to just sit there and be like, well, okay, like that you just missed that pass there. Like everybody had it. Nobody could complete a ball in the first half. Like everybody was kind of feeding off that same energy. But God, I'm going to go a little bit Clay with this. Like if we think about this match specifically, we are one Shaq Moore mistake away from just having a 1-0 win with a penalty involved. Like and that is not a common Shaq Moore thing to have happen, by the way, that own goal. Definitely not common. And I think he could probably speak for himself about, I mean, his reaction after that own goal was, you could tell he was trying to do something, but it didn't necessarily work out the same way. Um, but I don't know. I midfield for me is getting a little tough for me. I'm not. Drew Yearwood doesn't seem like he has really got into form yet, or is kind of fit in with this team. I'm getting kind of curious when it comes to his kind of right wing, center mid kind of hybrid positioning that's going on. I wonder if that's messing with him a little bit. I don't know. I think we talked about in the midfield, like we talked about the midfield having trouble in the offseason, and it doesn't look like that's changed.
Yeah, there's just new elements to it. By the way, don't look at the passing maps of the Red Bulls games or the Colorado game. It's literally depressing. It's some of the like it just doesn't look like how a team should be playing. But for Drew Yearwood and the midfield as a whole, I mean, they just haven't gotten into any sort of rhythm. But the midfield is not it's not an isolated problem. And like when we were talking about the defensive unit being very good defensively, that's not just the defenders. I mean, Sean Davis is putting in an effort there. Anibal Godoy is putting in an effort there. And Drew Yearwood are putting in an effort there because you defend as a team. You don't defend as just two center backs. What I would say is that for the midfield, it's kind of the same thing, but the attack has to pick up some of the slack, right? So like Tyler Boyd has to come to the midfield to receive the ball even, and then try to go a whole lot of way to get to the opponent's goal, to where, you would hope that if Hani Mukhtar or even Sam Surridge were there, they would be the ones dropping every now and again, switching with Tyler Boyd. So Boyd isn't the one coming back every single time. And same thing with Schaffelberg and Mackenzie Gaines. They are more they are expecting the ball to be played in front of them and for them to make that run. But it's really hard to play that ball when the other team is just sitting back and it's like, okay, here, take the ball. You can't make a run in behind if the other team is defending against you. It's very hard to do that, especially when Colorado was sitting there with all their defenders pretty much because they realized that they are lucky to get a win, or at the time it was a win for that game. So I think it's less so like here, this is the midfield, this is the problem, and it's more so when Nashville has the ball, the defense, midfield, and attack don't seem to have any ideas of what to do at the moment.
Yeah, and there definitely wasn't any answers, but a match that there was answers for was in midweek when Nashville did get their Champions Cup qualifying I'm gonna shut up. Their win against Mocha. The final score ended up being 4-0. Was it 4-0?
Yes.
Hey, I paid attention to things. Sorry, it's all a blur when you go from watching what you did on Saturday night to watching the match against Mocha. Yeah, we did have some goal scoring on Wednesday night.
Yeah, in the very short span of time, the span of one game, Forster Ajago became the second leading scorer among Ghanaians in Nashville SC history with 2 goals and he missed a pen too. Unfortunately, would have become the first non Hani Mukhtar to score a hat trick for NSC.
Dude, okay. Oh my God. So the penalty happens. And by the way, shout out to Top Ryan Onunga because he picked up the ball and handed it to Ajago and told him to take it because Ajago wasn't really, I don't know. I mean, he's new to the team. I don't know if he was like, wasn't sure
A
about it,
rookie.
but he's on a hat trick, right? And he's a rookie, like you said, but he's on a hat trick. And generally in soccer, if you're on a hat trick, team gets a penalty, you get the penalty. That's
They didn't
rule.
do it for Jack Mayer in Vancouver, you know. I mean, that's a clear recent example of them not doing it. Fortunately, Top Ryan Anunga stepped up to the plate.
But so Top Ranunga picks up the ball, gives it to Ajago, and I see that happen in front of me, and I'm like, all right, we got the narrative is writing itself, baby. First hat trick, not Hani Mukhtar player. Type up the tweet. I copy it over to Blue Sky, copy it over to Threads. I'm ready to hit send. The tweet is sent. The hashtags are in. I mean, the capitals, all the emojis are in. It's a beautiful tweet. I had such a beautiful tweet, and the keeper saved it. And I was just sitting there like, man, I'm gonna. So I saved it as a draft, and I was like, hopefully he gets a goal this game, so I can tweet this tweet. I unfortunately didn't get to do it.
Hey, to be fair, keeper had a great game. Nashville should have scored way more than they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think it's good. I think it's easy to be optimistic. I think it's a game that Nashville needed. I think Nashville needed to show that they're just they were the better team and then could put a lot of balls on net, actually score some goals. I, I'm a little bit more pessimistic about this match. I'm not gonna lie. I just think Mocha is extremely bad. Um, Like I think it's good for Forrest to get like goals. Absolutely, he took his opportunities, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's Nashville's I don't necessarily know if an international spot for him in MLS matches is worth it yet, just based on one match against Mocha. I'm happy he got his time, but I'm very curious on how far this is going to go.
And I agree with that. Sorry, Clay, you had some. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, he went undrafted for a reason. Like it's not like there isn't stuff out there on him, but Nashville clearly rates him. The amount of minutes they've been giving him says that he's shown them something that's worth it. But yeah, I expect him to still play more with Huntsville than anyone else. But if they do go out and get an international slot, or Schaffelberg gets a green card, or however they need to do it in order to get him on the roster, that just means it's a vote of confidence from the team that they think he's ready. And so I think that's the way fans should look at it.
I think the way I look at it here is that yeah, he was undrafted, but also I'm curious to see. I mean, they're never going to admit to it, but maybe there was some dealings with Nashville SC where, they talked to some teams, hey, leave this player off. We'll do this. There's a lot of these things that go on in MLS, especially with the draft, because he's clearly a good player. I mean, I think because you look at Teal Bunbury played what, a half against Mocha, didn't get a goal. Now, to be fair, it was away. The field conditions were terrible. Steve and I saw for ourselves. So, like, I'm not saying Ajago's better than Teal or anything like that, but I think there is something to be said about exactly like Clay said, is that he proved himself enough in preseason that Gary Smith gave him the start. Because look, Gary Smith doesn't hand out starts to people like that. If he doesn't
Especially young
believe in
players.
you, what's that?
Especially young players.
Especially young players. He does not do that. History tells us Nashville SC and Gary Smith do not do that. So the fact that he did get this start tells me that he's doing something right in training. He also called him Big Forster in one of the games, or one of the press conferences, and I really would like that name to stick around. So I want him to stick around just for that name.
I mean, it is worth noting that the young players that have played under Gary significant minutes are Alistair Johnson and Jack Mayer. Like that's a pretty shining shining example that when he chooses somebody that they look the part. The thing that I liked from him is the way he scored. Like that's one of the things that we talked about. The difference between like watching Daniel Rios in USL, you could just tell he was a step above
Mm-hmm.
all the other strikers that you would see in USL, except for maybe Cameron Lancaster when he was healthy. Like the way he scored just looked different, and he had a header like that was like he was sort of like horizontal with the ground, but was able to direct the header. It didn't score it. I think it hit the post or it got saved onto the post, and he had a couple goals like that or a couple of attempts like that just kind of opened your eyes and like there's a player in there. We're about to move on real quick. I just want to mention one real quick thing, unless you had something, Blair.
Yeah, I was just gonna say on Ajago, just like he's young and very hungry. Like that's I think the part where he's 22, he's trying really hard. Every battle, everything he's going at 100% because he's trying to prove himself to this team. So I think there's something to be said there. And international spots are about 150K in GAM. Look, you just have to take a flyer sometimes on a guy, and I don't see why Nashville SC would be scared to make that move, especially with Sturridge's injury history and Till Bunbury's history of not scoring. I think I'm just gonna go ahead and say that I think for me, you have that GAM, go ahead and get that spot.
Yeah, I would agree on that. The only reason I wouldn't agree on that is if they had some inside track on getting a green card for someone who doesn't currently have one. The thing I will say, speaking of that, is um, Schaffelberg, I think, had a great game. And obviously, you have to talk about the level of the opponent. That is worth noting. But one of the things that was missing from Schaffelberg in a lot of moments, in his time in Nashville, is that last ball in, getting that cross in, beating the man with the ball. Like he can take a guy one on one. He can obviously beat you with speed, but the last sort of level of development that it just wasn't there was finding the guy, with a cross or getting it into the box. And he had a few crosses in this game that were absolutely without a shadow of doubt the best crosses that he's put in a Nashville uniform. Now, it does help again. he wasn't being defended by MLS players, but I just wanted to like make a special mention that he does seem like he's made a real step here in these first few games of the season, even if we haven't seen it on the league side. And of course, Mackenzie Gaines scores. I'm high on Gaines, but Schaffelberg I was really impressed with against Mocha.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a potential that we do see Mackenzie Gaines, Jake Schaffelberg, and for Big Forest now, as we're going nickname wise, in our next match in the Champions Cup, which we'll talk about coming up here on the next segment, right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer. And we are back right here on Pharmaceutical Soccer. Last segment of the show at Pharma Soccer on our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And of course, as we talked about in the last segment and the first segment, you can find us on Patreon as well. So help support the show. We really appreciate you helping keep the lights on. Thank you so much. Look, we have some big stuff kind of coming up. I don't necessarily have like a specific like what was our segment where Valer reacts or makes problems in the first segment? What was the name of it?
Blared
Valerian
out.
out.
Blare it out. Yeah. There's not unfortunately a Steven out, but I'm gonna take like 10 seconds just to Steve Cherundolo for LAFC's head coach is a bum, and I hope they lose every single match the rest of the season.
Turandolo. I don't know what you're about to say,
Cherundolo.
but
Whatever his
Turandolo.
name is.
One of the greatest fullbacks in U.S. men's national team history. But other than that, yeah.
Yeah, fine.
Okay.
Whatever.
Steven is
Complain
not
about
a
the
US
snow
17
more
fan.
because you lost. If you didn't lose, you wouldn't have been complaining about the snow. But because you lost, you're complaining about the snow. That's all I have to say.
That game was an abomination. Shouldn't have happened. That's where I stand.
That's ridiculous. It absolutely
I'd
is.
say more orange ball games. Orange ball games are fun.
Thank you very much. You live in the United, like there's games in the United States of America where snow happens. Snow happens in other places in the world too, where there's matches and they're still being played. It happens. Snow, weather, things.
Okay. I don't care. Let's move on.
Thank you. That's why I
Okay.
took 10 seconds for that, and that's all I wanted. I just wanted my time. Something else to happen over the weekend, though, which I think is very interesting to talk about because it does relate to Nashville SC, would be Inter Miami. And their beating of Nashville, I mean, not of Nashville SC. God, I hope they don't beat Nashville SC in the way they beat Orlando. Beating Orlando 5-0 over the weekend. Where do you want to start with this Miami matchup? Because I think there's a lot to talk about here.
Let me start off by saying this. They have some of the best players of all time and the best player of all time. Okay. And quality doesn't really go away with age. It's more so the physical aspect of it. So when Luis Suarez is balling out, nobody should be surprised because it's Luis Suarez and he just scored 20 odd goals in the Brazilian league, which is better than MLS, by the way, just last season. That said, they aren't always going to be this good simply because of their age, right? That said, you can do stuff to prevent Miami from scoring. However, every now and again, you'll have a League Cup situation where Lionel Messi is going to be Lionel Messi and he's going to turn around, score a banger. You can't help that. What you can do as Nashville SC is not be Orlando City and gift them the goals. Now, sometimes they force you to gift them the goals. But here's the thing. Orlando just absolutely lost all sense of defending. The first goal they gave up was just a wrong pass that went straight to Messi, who figured something out, of course, because he's Messi. And then that sort of chain of individual errors and systematic errors continued until the game was 5-0. And even if you see like the fourth goal, Messi he scored it with his chest, by the way, because he's Messi and he can do stuff like that. But that whole like defending sequence is just infuriating, even not as an Orlando fan or somebody who cares about Orlando in any way, shape, or form. So if Miami and Messi were to beat you, let it be because of their brilliance and not because you're gifting them these goals. That's my spiel. Thank you so much for listening.
Anybody else have a spiel while we're doing Miami spiels?
Well, I mean, mine's not really about the game.
I know, but I was still segueing for your spiel to be happening. So I'm here for this.
I'm not particularly scared, as we talked about. I think that Nashville can do some things to make the match very difficult for Miami. I also think Miami is not going to be as adamant about, putting the accelerator down after a bunch of old guys scored goals just a few days prior, and potentially again later in the week in league play. So I do think they're going to get a pretty good shot from Miami. I also think that Nashville is probably going to play in a way that they can limit their chances and hopefully keep it a series going into the second leg. That being said, something similar about the first leg and the second leg is that I'm not going to either. And the reason I'm not going is because Nashville decided that they wanted to use Miami as a way of jacking up the prices on the people who pay to watch Nashville. And that's been my problem ever since they decided that they weren't going to tell ticket prices. That's been my problem the whole time. If they were playing Miami FC, I would be there. If they were playing Florida Soccer Soldiers, I would be there. They're playing Inter Miami, a team I do not care about. And that now my tickets are $100 to go see them, $300 for our three seats. And other people got theirs jacked up significantly more than I did. And I do not care what any sort of business rationalization they gave, because if they cared about business rationalizations, they would have allowed an opt-in, because you know what you can do with an opt-in? You can have 20,000 paid attendance at face value for Mocha. They decided they didn't care about that. They did a 30 to 40% markdown and they sold them for like $15. And so I do not care that they think they can make more money with Miami, because ultimately they're playing, most of us are there to watch Nashville, and they are taking a lesser home field advantage in an international tournament because of the team on the other side.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the way a competitive organization should run. And I also don't think that's the way that an organization in a publicly funded stadium on public land should be run.
Yeah, I think it's going to be
Publicly financed. Let me be clear. Publicly financed, not publicly funded. A publicly financed stadium on public. Like, I don't care what makes best business sense. This is a competitive tournament. It's about winning games. I don't understand why you would jack up prices on the people that help you win games.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an extremely different atmosphere than what we all experienced during that Leagues Cup match, where tickets were set by the Leagues Cup specifically, but we did have the chance to opt in at the regular price, where, I mean, I even feel like you probably could have had an opt-in for double the price, and you still would have had more people there in buying tickets than you would have at quadrupling the price for pretty much every seat in the building. Besides the people that were spending $5,000 a ticket at the match, guess what? The ones that can't afford it and pay for those tickets got theirs for free. So congratulations, premium members, for that. It is like there's a lot of excuses that could be kind of had in this round. And honestly, National FC has made them. Oh, guess what? Our tickets are a lot cheaper than all the other ones that other people are paying. Congratulations. It's just not a good look. And I think the atmosphere is going to show that. And I hope there are some lessons learned based on it. But I'm not sure if that's actually going to happen or not.
My whole thing is this. If you're going to make a decision to do this, own it. Don't send me a text message the day before the tickets are released saying you're finalizing prices. Because guess what? We can see the competition manual too. Those prices have been set for a minimum 15 days. Minimum 15 days.
Yep.
And don't say that you didn't choose those prices, because guess what? The competition rule says that the teams choose the prices. And you can say CONCACAF didn't approve it all you want. It represents 5% of ticket revenue is what's going to CONCACAF. It's not a big chunk of money, all things considered. I don't think they're telling you you have to jack up prices 4 times on people for this particular game. So that's the part that, if you're going to do it, just own it. Just tell us what you're going to do and just own it. But don't sit here and try and play the blame game. What they tried to do is hold it to the last minute so they only get a week of bad press. It's what they tried to do. And it's fine. If you want to run your business like that, that's fine. But don't sit here and try and act like you're trying to do anything other than jack up prices on the people who pay to watch you every single week. That's my problem.
Yeah, I mean I agree with both of you 100%. I agree with all the Nashville fans. I think it's absolutely just I don't know. I don't want to sound like a purist of any sort, but we talk about soccer being this sport that is different than other sports, and part of that is because it's affordable or should be affordable, right? Whether it's to play or to watch or whatever. I mean, Nashville SC is the cheapest professional sports ticket in Nashville. And that is a good thing. It should stay like that. It shouldn't be anything else just because one player is coming into town. When you look at, the Premier League, Arsenal or whatever team, they they've gone through prices rising, throughout because inflation and everything else. Their fans, their sort of organizations have a lot more of a say because those organizations have been established for 100 years, maybe even more sometimes. With Nashville SC, it's a new situation. I know it's been 5 years now, but still, or sorry, 8 years really, if you think the professional environment as a whole. But that's still not enough time for Nashville SC to kind of have that sort of rapport with their fans. And moments like this define that relationship with their fans. Moments like this define those diehard. Currently, you cannot buy a season ticket to Nashville SC because there's a wait list because all season tickets have been sold out. That's an incredible achievement. And if you want to keep that going, you can't be acting like that. And that it's as simple as that. It's not, I don't have to pay for a ticket, so I don't want to sit here and talk to you about it like it's affecting me personally. But I know so many people who see like Clay, like Steven, even if he was in town, who see just all of a sudden became 4 times more expensive. And it's one thing when you do it for supporter section because it's still like under 100, which I know is a lot of money for a lot of people. I'm not saying, but it's different when all of a sudden your seat is 5 times or 6 times more, and you can't see your team in the biggest moments playing against Messi. And Leagues Cup was whatever. It was the cup final. Things were all out of place, but they had a lot more control in this one. And I gotta say, I'm very disappointed in the way they handled it.
The thing that really irks me as I thought about it over the weekend is that they would have been able to recoup the money. One, doing an opt-in because they would have been getting more than 6,000 paid for Mocha FC, and they also would have been getting more than they would have gotten paid on a few weeks' notice on the other side if they were to beat Miami. So the optics to me are they know they can get their money from Miami and they don't really care what happens after, or they don't back Nashville to win the game after Miami. And I think that that's a fair read because they're not going to be able to sell it out in the next round. They just aren't. And they're going to have it as cheaper prices. So they're trying to make sure they make all the money they want to make off this tournament in the one game, which means that they don't back themselves to make a tournament run. And that speaks, I think, to a real problem. And not that they're necessarily wrong. I'm like, it's a tough game against Miami, admittedly. But if you're in a competitive environment and you're trying to win your first trophy as an organization, because they didn't even really win a trophy in as a fan-owned club. If you're trying to win your first trophy as an organization and you're deciding against maybe the best team on the American side of the tournament, potentially, that you're willing to give up your home field advantage in a continental knockout competition solely to make more money, like what does that say about you as an organization?
Yeah. And
That I mean, just leave it at that. Like, what does that say about you?
well, I mean, I think it leads into like what to expect from this match coming up. From the playing perspective, I think that's what it leads to, and we'll get into those predictions. I do want to talk about the Galaxy really quick because we do have another match coming up over the weekend, which actually play wise scares me a little bit more when it comes to the probably just one of the most dramatically increased skill-wise teams this year that I've seen so far when it comes to the way the Galaxy were before and just a couple players that they have signed that have absolutely made that team one to be reckoned with. So I'm a little scared for this. I'm a little scared for the Galaxy match as well.
Yeah, they're looking really good. They opened their MLS season against Miami in a 1-1 draw that was a little risky. They got a second yellow that shouldn't have been ever given as a yellow. So they could have gone a win against Miami. And then they go to San Jose, a big rival for them, of course, and they destroy them 3-1. Painstill is the winger they purchased from Jank, I believe, or Gent from Belgium.
Real
He's
deal.
been amazing. I just voted for him as player of the week. Well, the second player of the week, Luis Suarez was my first pick. He played really well. I watched a good bit of that match, and he was looking really sharp. The other winger they bought is Pack or something like that. Sorry, I can't pronounce his name sometimes, but he's gonna be influential as well. So they're just looking at a better team. Of course, Ricky Puig is still there, and Joveljic, who is the center forward. He's really good. Defensively, they have some questions to answer to. The goal they gave up against Miami was, I mean, it was magic between Alba and Messi, but still it was avoidable. And then same thing with the San Jose goal, was kind of a ricochet ball that dropped into a San Jose player who knocked it in. So defensively, they are beatable. I just think that attack is currently looking really good and it's all gelling together, which isn't necessarily good news for Nashville. And the big point for LA here for the Galaxy is that they don't have Champions Cup. They don't have midweek game. They're gonna have a full week rest and some because they played Saturday and then they play Sunday. So, they do have a long trip to make to Nashville, but they have a longer rest as well. So I think it's gonna be a pretty difficult match for Nashville SC.
Well, let's get into the predictions and plugs and all of that, Valer. Why don't you just keep going with both your Miami and Galaxy predictions?
Yeah, first of all, I just want to say that Kicking It 615, we need a lot of coaches to come through and help us. If you don't know about us, Kicking It 615 at ki615.org and at Kicking It 615 on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We are a nonprofit organization who helps kids who can't afford soccer play soccer free of charge. You're probably tired of listening to me talk about it. If you are, here's what you need to do. Go out there and either volunteer, donate, or share our stories and post. That's what you need to do if you're tired of me talking about it.
It's true.
But
If you
we
do
do need,
volunteer, Valer will shut up. Like I volunteered a couple times just to get him to shut up.
and I stopped talking to Steven altogether. So it was great. But but no, really help us out. We need coaches and we need other volunteers as well. So jump on the wagon and help some kids play soccer. Miami match. It's gonna be. You know what? I'm just gonna go for it. It's gonna be 1-0 Nashville SC win against Miami, and the goal is gonna come from Tyler Boyd, whose incredible form is gonna continue on to face his former team and salvage Nashville 1 point from LA Galaxy after going down 1-0 and getting the 1-1 draw at home by scoring against his former team, the LA Galaxy. And I'm going to go ahead and say he's going to celebrate that goal as he should because I kind of didn't want him there. So I don't know if anybody saw Chicho Arango celebrating against LAFC by making snow angels, but that was pretty cool. So I'm hoping for something similar just because I like the drama.
Oh, so snow is fine now, but
Okay, come on. I can have some fun too.
um, yeah, I think we're probably in for another couple of on the surface drab performances, if we're being honest. I think that I think that Miami's going to bank a little bit on the home game in Miami and knowing that Nashville is going to be light on firepower and we might not see a full strength Inter Miami squad in Nashville. Um, so I'm going to go with a scoreless draw in Nashville and a very boring scoreless draw at that. And then a 1-0 win over LA Galaxy at home with the goal coming from a returning Hani Mukhtar.
Can you imagine what another nil-nil draw, like just a draw in general, would do on Thursday if that happens? We're talking about vitriol now when it comes to Nashville fans. Boy, that would be
If they get a
something.
0-0 draw against Inter Miami, I think people will be pretty happy about that.
I cannot wait to have this conversation later.
Well, I think people that are thinking rationally will understand that that's a result. I'll phrase it that way. Maybe happy is not the right word, but people will
Yeah, that makes
understand
a
that
lot
that's
more
a good
sense.
result.
Yep.
I mean, if we got a nil-nil draw against Miami at home, I would not be happy because that kind of shows where we're at in the competition and how we are not one of those teams. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Nashville is going to get a 1-0 win. I do think it will be a very boring defensive game again for Nashville, but Walker Zimmerman will jump up, use his head, and get one of those infamous Nashville SC corner goals. So 1-0 for Nashville against Miami. And then I'm going to go 1-1 draw against the Galaxy with Schaffelberg getting the goal against the Galaxy. So thank you guys again. Oh, I'm Stephen Robinson, by the way, at PHStephenHD on all socials. That's where you can find me. Thank you so much again for listening to the show. We really appreciate it. Obviously, there was a lot to talk about for us, and I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about next week as well. So thank you guys so much for listening. We'll be back next week to talk about Nashville SC.